Everybody, this is Tony with Tori again tonight. Tori, go ahead and say hello.
Hey, everybody. It's good to be with you tonight.
We are coming live from Utah as usual. This is unscripted, so your questions, if there's some delay or some pauses, understand that that is part of the fact that this is not scripted. We don't have question and answers that are coming in. We've already answered. So if this webinar can go any way, it can go the way of answering questions about youth, young adults. It could go to that question asking about adults, pornography, alcohol, drugs. It doesn't matter. We are here to help you answer your questions about addictions, and that's what we're here for. Tori comes to Yes Clinics with the desire and the motivation to help young adults and teenagers. Tori absolutely loves it so much that he's changing his career from being in charge of financial. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's the finance industry. Yep.
So he probably makes a lot more money than he could here. But we're glad to have him part of the team, and we look forward to these webinars every month. Tori, we're going to go ahead and start off. We've got questions that came in from before, and I promised that I would get to them first.
Okay.
And the first question that comes is, how long does it take to recover from porn and masturbation?
It's a really good question. The short answer is that it varies by individual tremendously. And I know that seems like a really easy answer, but the truth is that there's a lot of variables involved in the recovery process. Every individual is going to approach recovery in a little different way, not because the steps are all that different necessarily, but that their situation is different. Every person has unique circumstances, unique challenges. They've been dealing with addictive behavior for variable amounts of time. Some people have dealt with it for many years. Others, it's a shorter time frame. And so that plays a part in it. Another aspect is the support level that they have, the support network. If they have a pretty robust support network of people around them who can be, there for them in the tough moments and can be a support and show that unconditional companionship and love for them, then the progress is likely to be made a little bit faster typically. And so those kinds of things are all going to play a part in recovery. Another element is the fact that everybody's going to have a different level of emotional aspect to consider in that. So the emotions of recovering from addiction are very different as well. They're powerful for everybody, but everybody's going to have a little different sense of the kinds of emotions that they're dealing with, why they're there. There's different underlying factors that are causing the desire or the need to cope in an unhealthy way through an addictive behavior. And so all of those factors can really perpetuate a problem or delay a problem, or can be a help in recovering, depending on the situation. So it's a great question. I think the challenge is that it is very different for everybody. I think to give you a rough estimate in terms of a concrete number, I would say that typically it takes at least several months for somebody to be able to make significant changes in their life. It takes years to, I would say, master the recovery process. And then it's really a lifelong process to completely manage that. There's no such thing as a graduation, if you will. It's really something where for the entire lifespan, somebody's going to be actively managing addictive behavior and triggers and so forth. It doesn't mean that every day will be a struggle. It just means that there will always be a trigger or a challenge of some sort to try to manage, and it can definitely be done. And there's a lot of great positive things that can happen. People that come to us, they find such great joy in that journey as they do find those successful things and those accomplishments that they are able to get to. But it does take, on average, quite a bit of time. But that's okay, because life is about learning. Life is about growing. And we're there to walk with you. And I think that's the nature of that process is that it's a process. It's not a decision. It's a series of decisions. It's a series of efforts and chapters in life, and gradually great things will come of it.
Okay, just really quick, I want to make sure that everybody can hear. Actually, I forgot I got to unmute my mic here. Okay, just want to make sure that everybody can hear us okay, and that there's no audio issues, anything weird happening. We are in the same building, but we're using a headset, so hopefully we can avoid that. So just let us know if you have any problems, and we'll remedy that as fast as we can. But we're going to go ahead and continue with the questions. For those who are new, if you have a question, our goal and our promise is to maintain anonymity so that you can ask any question you want without being recognized, without any fear of asking the question. And our policy is you ask the question, we'll give you the answer. If we don't have the answer, then we'll find out. We'll do research to get that answer for you. Now, if it deals with something that's medical, we are not doctors. We are not doctors at all. So understand that if it deals with medical, we're just going to tell you that you'll need to talk to your medical physician, because obviously for legal reasons you can't recommend stuff like that. Okay. Okay, I'm getting a message that my mic is echoing. Is it still echoing? Hopefully it's not. We'll just continue with the next question. Okay. Whom should I tell my spouse's addiction to porn?
So just to clarify, is the question, who should I tell about my spouse's addiction? Is that the question?
Yes, it sounds like they're asking, they need to talk to somebody. Whom should they tell and whom should they not tell?
Okay, very good. One very important aspect of determining who you can share such things with would be who can you share that with without any sort of shaming going on for your spouse or for you. So what we mean by that is that when we talk about shaming, we refer to the feeling of someone being viewed very negatively. When we shame ourselves, we feel extremely down about ourselves. We feel like we're worthless, like we're not valuable, we're not acceptable, that our cause is hopeless, that kind of thing. That's shame. And if in the process of sharing with other people, which is a very important element of getting the kind of support that you need to be able to foster recovery, I would suggest, first of all, that you look for someone with whom you can share information in a non-shaming sort of way. And that means that the spouse is sharing things in a non-shaming way to a third party, but also the third party is someone who is trustworthy and someone that can provide feedback, be a sounding board, be simply a listening ear without inducing any sort of shame on that person. That's actually one of the biggest reasons why a spouse of a recovering addict often doesn't share, is because of the potential for shaming their spouse. And so there's a concern about that. And I think maybe that's a part of where that question is coming from. So I think I would suggest you look to somebody who's close to you, but can be very trustworthy in terms of understanding that it's not about disparaging or talking negatively about your spouse. It's simply about sharing your emotions, your experience, and your own healing process. And sometimes it requires a little bit of education to that person to let them know, hey, if I can share things with you, this is what I would hope to get in response. It would be simply for you to listen, simply for you to understand that it's a challenge. You don't even have to go through it yourself as a real life experience to be able to fully understand that I'm struggling. And so that idea really helps that person to also not feel the pressure of, oh boy, I'm not sure how to be a support to that spouse of a recovering addict. So those are a few things to think about. I often have people who will say, I turn to a sibling or to a parent or to a close friend who is extremely trustworthy, as I said before, someone who can be very supportive and view the situation in a supporting role without issuing judgment, without being casting shame upon that person, but simply listening and being supportive. And as I said, oftentimes there is a certain amount of education that goes into it up front to let the person with whom you're sharing, to let them know what you expect out of that role. Is it simply listening? Is it simply hearing you, being there for you? That's usually what that spouse of the recovering addict is looking for, is simply help and support for them. So that's a very good question. And I would just add too, on maybe a slightly different note, that we very much understand that the spouse of a recovering addict is definitely going through their own healing process as they go through this. There is no doubt. I've worked with a lot of couples and also others who maybe work with a family member in their recovery process, and inevitably there's a healing process. There's a pain experience for the spouse or the significant other of the person who's recovering, and so that needs to be very well understood and considered, so that the spouse as well as the recovering person can get the help and the support that they need.
Okay, one other thing I want to add to that is the fact that when you talk to somebody, especially if it's your spouse or a loved one, when you talk to them, I'm displaying a slide right up here right now. It's very important to take this in mind. Are you safe to talk to? Can you help? And can I trust you? Those are the questions that are going through your mind, because nobody likes to feel shame. And hopefully we'll get into some more about shame, because we feel that shame is a leading problem to fueling the addiction. Okay, we're going to go on with the next question. Is my voice now sounding better now that I'm toggling back? Okay, woohoo, we got it here. Okay, the next question is when I rewire after my addiction, this question's kind of weird, so I'm trying to rephrase it a bit. It says, do I have to have sex in order to rewire my brain? Give me 1 second.
Yep, we'll see. Okay. All right. Hopefully everybody can hear me. I think we were having a mute problem there for just a moment when I was on mute. So the question, I believe, is, as I understand it, is in order to kind of fulfill the process of rewiring my brain, or in other words, healing from addictive behavior, especially sexual addictive behavior, is there a need for carrying out sexual behavior in order to do that rewiring? And that's what I understand the question to be. And I would answer that certainly that's one component of the healing process, definitely. As we are all aware, and we firmly believe that every person has a sexual component to who they are. You're born with that. It's a natural element, and so the sexual drive is something that is going to be a component in the limbic part of the brain your entire life. So that is a very important aspect to consider. Now, healing from an addiction involves managing impulses, but it also involves learning how to cope in healthy ways with triggers and with situations that are potentially triggering. So what that means is that you have to be able to consider all components of your life that require coping. So if there's stress or depression or anxiety or loneliness, boredom, those are all aspects that often require coping mechanisms to be implemented so that you can deal with those. We as human beings want to deal with things, and those are all things that require us to respond simply because they're not comfortable. Nobody likes to feel lonely or bored or angry or stressed or whatever. And so you want to do something about that. And typically when someone is addicted, they've learned to cope with things in an unhealthy way by turning to addictive behaviors such as sexual addictive behavior, pornography, masturbation, that kind of thing. So while healing requires learning new coping approaches, definitely understanding that a sexual impulse can be managed in a healthy way with healthy sexual behavior that you view to be effective within your value system, that is not simply fulfilling an addictive behavior, but is a healthy behavior that you're choosing to do, that can definitely be one way to help cope in a more effective way. So that's definitely a thing that can help. I think another thing to think about, though, is that there are other aspects of life that do require coping, and so that rewiring process will happen as you learn how to cope in various ways. So that's going to be something that goes beyond sexual things, but certainly engaging in healthy sexual behavior can reinforce positive behaviors that can help you to connect with your significant other in a healthy way. It can create a healthy bond. It can create an improved communication. All those kinds of things can be improved through engaging in healthy sexual behavior. But again, just remember that there are other elements of life that also have to be considered. As Tony's showing a slide right now showing the limbic system and how it's so instinctual by nature, we're going to first, pardon me, seek to survive, number one. Number two, avoid pain. And number three, seek pleasure. And so that means that anytime we engage the pleasure centers of the brain, which are part of the limbic system, you're going to be dealing with that, an instinctual aspect of who we are. And by nature, that means that we're dealing with things that are, part of an impulse response. And so the more we're able to direct our behavior in a very intentional way and not respond in an impulsive way, the more we're going to be able to cope in a healthy way overall. So I hope that answers that question.
Okay, our next question is will stopping viewing porn solve my problems? I guess this is kind of an open-ended question. I really need to kind of know what problems you are having, but I'll hand it over to Corey to see if he has anything to that.
Yeah, absolutely. So that is a fairly open question. We would like to know more detail about what other challenges are going on, for example. But if we're talking about specifically the equation of stop viewing pornography equals recovery from addiction, I don't think I could say that it's exactly that simple. Stopping the behavior is certainly one part of recovery. The goal is to reduce or eliminate that behavior completely. And I think most people would define healing as successfully avoiding the behavior, remaining sober, if you will, or completely avoiding the acting out behavior that's part of the addiction. So that is certainly a part of it. However, healing, complete healing, also involves establishing new patterns of behavior that are helpful. And so sometimes those new patterns of behavior may be somewhat difficult to form. It may be difficult to engage in consistently new behaviors that are healthy. But over time, just as the addiction was learned, because it is a learned behavior, other behaviors can also be learned. And so I would just take that the stopping the behavior itself and being sober, to use that term in terms of recovery from addiction, from addictive behavior and not acting out, being sober is certainly one important aspect of it. But there are many other elements too. Learning how to cope, as I referred to just a few minutes ago with the prior question, learning how to cope effectively with the normal stresses of life, with the normal human impulses that are bound to come, is taking that healing process to the next level, where you're able to understand healthy ways to cope with things. Because you know, I think it's been proven many times when you look at the recovery model of someone, for example, who goes into residential treatment for alcohol or drug abuse. If there is a very strong addiction and stability is seriously threatened, life, you know, safety itself is seriously threatened, then residential therapy can be a very important step. However, one of the drawbacks is that you're not learning to cope with the normal struggles of life while in the process of recovery in a residential facility. And so that model can be life-saving in one sense, but at the same time it can also be limiting because of the nature of the need to learn how to cope with life at the same time as stopping a behavior. So there's some very important components to that. There are other components to think about as well, such as being able to have the kind of social support network in place that will help to reinforce new behaviors and that sort of thing. But the bottom line is that stopping the behavior is one very important step, but it's one of several that you would take part in as you recover fully.
Okay, moving on. The next question is this person suffers from anxiety and depression. And so they want to know, is porn making my social anxiety / confidence and depression worse?
Oh, that's a very interesting question. You know, there's a lot of debate oftentimes about whether or not something like a porn addiction or any other addiction is the cause or the effect of other problems in life. And I would say that the simple answer is yes. Meaning that it can be both a cause and an effect. We turn to addictive behavior typically to numb ourselves from something else. And as a result, we engage in something that we don't really want to engage in. In fact, we may absolutely abhor it. We may actually despise it. But we turn to it because it might be in some emotional way something that we consider to be a better alternative, at least for the moment, compared to what we're dealing with otherwise. So again, whether it's loneliness or whether it's boredom or whether it's anger or whether it's social anxiety or something of that nature, it can be both a cause and an effect. I mentioned that it can be a cause because we're numbing, and so that results in problematic ways of coping with those things. It can also be an effect in the sense that if we are striving to deal with an internal struggle, that internal struggle is going to have an impact typically in how we interact with other people. If we don't feel at peace, if we don't feel a balance within ourselves, if we don't feel a sense of worth and that we're accomplishing good things in life, that we are progressing, that we are worth something, then often that can seriously impact, in a very negative way, how we feel about ourselves in relation to others and how we actually interact with others. So that social anxiety could very easily be the result of a lack of internal peace, a lack of internal satisfaction with one's life. You mentioned depression and anxiety as well, and depression is very frequently a result of an addictive behavior, simply because the addictive behavior reinforces the idea of hopelessness. And it reinforces the idea of I'm a lost cause. I've battled with this. I can't overcome it. I'll never get past it. Therefore, whatever conclusion we come to, I'm a bad person. I'm worthless. I'm hopeless. Whatever it is, can very much make us feel depressed and keep us feeling very down. Activities that we would normally enjoy doing, that would normally bring us joy, no longer do so because we feel that lack of worth and peace within ourselves. And we worry. We're also engaged in worrying about, covering it up, for example, or worrying about the impact of the behavior. Am I going to lose my marriage? Am I going to lose my job? Am I going to have some other major significant impact, consequence in my life as a result of this? And so the worrying increases. And you hear the saying, you worry about worrying. Yeah, that's true. I think there is a lot to be said for the idea of worrying about the things that are not going well in life, and certainly the addiction can be a way to numb from that, and it can perpetuate that. It can cause that as well. So I think it's important to think about it in both ways, that it can be a cause and an effect. Oftentimes it's not so much, at least in my experience, it's not so much whether it is the cause or the effect as it is something that is a factor, period. And knowing that it is a factor can be something that we can start to address as we talk through the challenges that come with addictive behavior, as well as the other, depression and anxiety and things like that.
Can porn numb my emotions?
Yeah, the question follows nicely with the answer to the last question. The answer is absolutely yes, definitely. Porn can absolutely numb your emotions. Even if it's only temporary, that is exactly what it does. Not because there's no emotion at all, because there is the emotional experience of the pleasure center being gratified in the brain. There's a chemical release that's going on in the brain with dopamine and adrenaline and other chemicals that are flooding the brain, and so the result is that there's a pleasurable experience that actually sort of hides or disguises or numbs whatever else was previously being experienced. That's why there's a sense of relief. Someone who goes through what we would call white knuckling, for example, or striving to not act out, striving to not indulge in the addictive behavior by sheer willpower, they feel a sense of relief when they do act out, simply because, okay, the pleasure center is being rewarded, and all of a sudden I feel like, okay, I'm out of that white knuckling experience. I'm out of that willpower need because I've gone through with it, and so now I'm done. I've fulfilled what I was feeling the impulse to do, and as a result, I feel relief from that. But that's temporary, and so that's the reason, again, why addictive behavior doesn't just go away with a single instance of acting out. It comes back again because that relief is only temporary. That numbing is only temporary, and eventually we come back to a sense of regret, a sense of recovery from acting out. We had the negative feelings about ourselves and the situation for a while, and for an indeterminate amount of time, we're going to work on that. Eventually, we typically pick ourselves back up, and then we move on. And then we go through the same kinds of emotional experiences in life that we try to numb ourselves from again. And again, those can vary a lot, but whatever it is, we go back to this life struggle, and the cycle begins all over again. So the answer is definitely there's a numbing aspect to it, especially in the sense of relief from the difficult emotions that precede it, but inevitably it does come back.
Can porn use affect memory and concentration?
Yes, it can. I've had a number of people that I've worked with tell me that the addiction is very consuming, that it is very difficult to focus on anything else, especially in the moment of a trigger. Focus and concentration are seriously impacted by that. One of the reasons for that is that the limbic system, again, is going through a process where that impulse is being processed and the chemical reaction is happening, and that can often overwhelm the prefrontal cortex, the frontal part of the brain, which is the part of the brain that deals with the reasoning and the logic. So a lack of focus can definitely occur when the limbic response is being enacted very powerfully. Now, outside of being triggered and being, experiencing the actual limbic response to an impulse, I've also had a lot of people share with me that through the pattern of acting out and engaging in that cycle over and over, they do find a less ability sometimes to focus and concentrate on things. That's not always the case, I wouldn't say. I think there's plenty of people who would say, no, once I get through that impulsive experience, that limbic response, I'm okay, I can focus again and I can move through that. But there are some people who've experienced some longer term effects from that. I think a lot of that is related to the fact that the brain is learning simply a behavior. It's learning that focus does not bring what it wants. It's learning that the limbic experience is what it wants. That's not to say that the person wants it, but that's what happens in the brain when the addiction is powerful enough that it's causing a lack of focus, a lack of decision making, a lack of the normal thinking part of the brain to be able to have enough power to engage in decision making. And so focus and concentration, that sort of thing, can be affected by it. I think a lot of people would say, though, that the more you're able to manage the triggers themselves and the acting out behavior, the better the concentration is. And to be honest, a lot of what we do when we focus on helping people through the process of change is actually engaging in focus. It's actually engaging in awareness, the awareness of addictive behavior, the awareness of an impulse, a trigger, awareness of circumstances, awareness of the addictive voice itself, which is saying, this is what I want versus this is what the person wants. And we try to distinguish between the two and increase that awareness significantly so that there is a far greater ability to concentrate on the chosen behaviors.
Yeah, this question comes from an individual who their spouse is just struggling with this. And it says, should we tell our children?
That's also a very good question. Should we tell our children? Number one, I think that is a very personal decision to make. I think it's not always a cut and dried answer. I think in some cases that can be very helpful. In some cases it's not so helpful. Probably the majority of the time it is a helpful thing at the right time and in the right way. I think there are examples that's been proven many, many times that the more openness there is, the more likely one is able to heal and recover from addictive behavior. The more secrecy there is, the harder that becomes, and the more natural culturally shaming and destructive the behavior is. So secrecy basically reinforces the behavior. And that's why one of the steps that is usually a very critical part of recovery, complete recovery, is being able to reach out and share beyond yourself with other people. Now that happens not only in individual therapy, but also that happens in group therapy. And a lot of people go to a 12-step program, for example, as a way to share with other people and hear other people sharing, so that they can then get more comfortable with that idea and they start practicing that sharing. There is a very therapeutic aspect to that experience that's very important. Group therapy does have a very important place, and it's very important. Now, getting back to the question about a couple sharing with their children, I think it more than anything, it would depend on the timing of that information. It would depend on the timing, the step, the stage of recovery that the addict is going, what they've achieved thus far, as how they feel about themselves emotionally, as well as the status of those children. So going back to the first one, if the person who's recovering from addiction is feeling very ashamed about themselves, and their self-view is extremely negative, extremely self-defeating, then they're very likely not in a place to share with other people, because they can't even go there at that point. It's very destructive to go there at that stage. When they go through enough healing themselves to where they can feel much better about who they are, they can feel like they're achieving more in life, and that the next step feels like sharing with more people, that's when the time is generally more appropriate to start opening up and sharing with that. I think the age of the children also plays an important aspect of that. They need to be old enough to be able to understand things, and you need to be able to share with them enough information, but not too much information, because too much information is also destructive. So for example, sharing vivid details about addictive behavior is not a helpful step. It's usually very destructive to do that. But to share the idea of struggle, to share, hey, this is something I've been working on, it's been a challenge, but I'm making progress and I'm engaged in recovery right now. That's a very effective thing to share, and can open up a lot of very healthy dialogue and conversation, especially with children who are mature enough to be able to discuss that. And so those are some general answers. It's important to know that every person and every situation is different. And so it's important for you to consider your own circumstances. And I would definitely recommend you talk to a therapist about that and your particular relationships and situation before you do that.
Now, this is a two-part question. Is it recovery? Excuse me. This person found out their spouse is addicted, and he says, I can't be supportive of my husband, but how can I? So she's struggling to do it, to be supportive, but yet she's wanting to be supportive.
Okay. Yeah, so there's two parts to that, basically. I think what you're saying is, at this point, I can't support because it's too difficult for me to be able to be supportive. And secondly, I would like to, so how do I go about, that process of arriving at that place where I can be supportive? So those are two very difficult circumstances. So with the idea of I simply can't be supportive, I guess the first thing that comes to my mind in that situation is that you still want to, even if you don't understand the addiction, even if you can't be in a real truly supportive place yet, meaning that you are engaging in conversations about it, you are helping with the process, you're part of therapy and healing. If you can't be involved quite yet because of your own circumstances, your own emotions, which are probably related to being very hurt emotionally, being very feeling deceived, feeling let down, feeling inadequate. Those are a lot of the feelings that a spouse very often goes through in this experience. If that's where you are right now, what I would emphasize is that's okay, because it's not an easy process, and you're going to go through your own healing to be able to get to the point where you can be in a supportive place. I wouldn't be too hard on yourself about that, because it is difficult for you. You're suffering. You're experiencing a lot of challenges, as I mentioned just a minute ago. And so the challenge for you is just as real to get to the point where you can be supportive as it is for the person who's recovering to go through recovery. So that's a very important thing to keep in mind. So I think, first of all, accept that that's just the reality of where you are emotionally right now. That's probably number one. And number two would be, if you still feel love for your significant other despite a serious obstacle in being able to be supportive through recovery, still express that love. Even if you feel like you're not being supportive, loving them is being supportive. And that shows that through it all, you're going to be there. And that's very empowering for someone who is recovering from addiction. It can be very helpful for them to receive that response. Generally, I think the person who is addicted is going to understand that you're in pain when you become aware of their addiction. And it's very difficult for you, and there's not the expectation generally that you're going to be just ready to go and be supportive. Eventually, though, you can get there. So now I would turn to the second stage, which is eventually getting to the point where you can be supportive. To get there, it takes time. Allow yourself to take some time for that. There's no need to swallow your emotions and pretend like they're not there. In fact, that's very destructive to try to do that, to pretend like you don't have negative emotions about it, or that you don't have frustrations, or that doesn't impact you in any way, because it truly does impact you. So understand that and be okay with that. Communicate. I would also suggest that you communicate that very thing to your spouse or your significant other, so that they're aware of where you are. Let them know that there is a struggle, that your desire is to be supportive, but if you're not there, then that's the reality. But if they know that your desire is there, that's at least something that they can build on, and that you can build on. And it does create the sense of hope, and there's a sense of long term, we can still potentially get through this. So I think that's an important aspect of that. We definitely recommend the idea of couples therapy or family therapy for those who are going through this process together. That doesn't mean that you're going to automatically feel better about it just because you engage in couples or family therapy, but over time it can definitely impact your ability to heal and recover within your own emotional experience, and then start to be there more for the significant other as well.
Along those lines, is there really recovery from sexual addiction?
Great question. Is there really recovery? I would say that yes, there is really a recovery, but it may not be the kind of recovery that you're thinking of if you're asking that question. Often people ask, basically, will I, number one, be able to stop the behavior? And number two, stop the impulse to engage in the behavior. I think the answer to number one is certainly yes. You can certainly stop engaging in the behavior and become sober. The answer to number two is kind of a yes and a no. Yes, you can certainly manage triggers much better. You can certainly recognize them better. You can certainly change your response to them so that they do not lead you down the road of addictive behavior and acting out. However, I think I would also remind you that because sexual drive is a part of who we are as human beings, it's part of our brain, it's part of our instinctual brain responses. It's built in. It will not go away completely, and you wouldn't want it to. And I'm sure the person asking that question would not want to have it go away completely, the sexual drive, that is. But because it's inherent to who we are as human beings, the answer is that we will always have sexual impulse, sexual drive, an intuition, a desire to respond to a stimulus. That will always be there. It's built in. Even if you try to get rid of it, that doesn't happen. It's built into who we are as human beings. And so that's a very important aspect to think about. And as Tony is emphasizing on that slide that he's showing right now, sexuality is a basic instinct. And a lot of people would question that. They would say, well, I understand air and food and water. Those are needed for your physical body to literally stay alive. And that's true. Is sexuality, though, something that you need to literally stay alive? Well, my answer to that would be a question and an answer. Question is, could you theoretically live your entire life without engaging in sexual behavior in any way and still survive and live a long life? The answer would be yes, you could. There are people who have done it, and it'll happen again. There are certain people who, for example, their value system would say, I don't engage in sexual behavior unless I'm married, for example. And so if I don't ever marry, then I don't engage in the behavior, that sort of thing. So in that sense, yeah, you could survive. You could live your life without that. But as human beings, we perpetuate the human race through reproduction and through that sexual intimacy. So therefore, it's part of the instinctual part of the brain. It is a survival instinct. And so that's something that I think is very important to keep in mind. It's nothing to be ashamed of. It's nothing to be disappointed with. It's something to celebrate and to be glad about, because it is a great thing as long as it's managed. And so the short answer to that question is that recovery is definitely possible, which means that you are able to manage sexual impulses and triggers effectively the rest of your life, and engage in the behaviors that you choose to engage in. That's essentially what recovery means. I hope that answers that question.
I think one of the things that's really important to also note here is to identify what it is that you're looking for in the terms of recovery. Like Tori was just talking about, he says, managing those sexual behaviors. So you need to identify yourself. I know some people who they've talked about their sobriety, how they feel that they're progressing, that they're doing better, and that they're in recovery, is because they're in a happier place, because they've recognized that they are improving, and they're improving daily. And I thought that was such a healthy answer for sobriety or towards recovery, because so many times we want this done. I don't want to deal with it anymore. We just want it done. And I think that was a very helpful thing. Okay, next question is, where can we turn to for help? We've been talking about help. Where can we turn to?
Yeah, excellent question. So we have a great online support system that you can engage in. Obviously, the fact that you're involved in this webinar right now is something that can be helpful for you. If you go to pornstinks.com, if you go to some of the other websites that we have, utahfamilytherapist.com, and it's yestime.com. All of those will lead you to resources that will help you. There are plenty of online resources, and then we also have the individual therapy and family therapy, marriage and family therapy that you can choose to engage in as well with us. And there are lots of providers as well. Not every therapist is knowledgeable enough to be able to help specifically with pornography and other sexual addictions. So I think I would be careful about the provider that you are seeking help from. But we are certainly willing to engage in helping you in any way that we possibly can. If you want to contact us either through our websites or through through in-person therapy sessions, even phone sessions, Skype sessions, whatever we can do to help you, we're certainly willing to do that. So I don't know if Tony, if you wanted to add anything to that as well about our resources.
Well, that's kind of that's all the behind the scenes stuff that I do. So that's why Tori turns that over to me. That's why we do these question and answers, is really we want to be able to help people. And one of the things that even if we can't help you and you feeling lost, we can help you find the resource that you need. We can be there to find that help you find that right resource. We're working with somebody who's across the country right now, but we actually found a therapist where she lives to be able to work with her. And we are doing nothing but help set up the appointment and said, hey, this person needs help. We think you fit good criteria and you match the values that we espouse. So will you take her on? And then we follow up with that individual to see if it was a good fit. If it's not, then we'll find somebody else. But we've also done a lot of, over the phone through Skype sessions and stuff like that, because there's people who haven't been able to connect with. So our goal is to get you the help and the healing that you needed. I mean, it's just pure and simple. We're not trying to beat around the bush or anything. We want to help you. And if that's with us or with somebody else, our goal is to help you. So, okay, here's another question that we frequently get. My husband says men do it, so what's a big deal out of it? I'm making too big of a deal out of this.
Yeah, that is a great point to bring up. There are many in the world who believe that engaging in this kind of behavior with specifically pornography and masturbation to some extent as well, there are many who believe that it's perfectly fine, healthy behavior. And, in contrast, there are others who would say it's very detrimental to my life. And further still, there are those who would also say that it's against their value system. So I would call out the difference there between those who have a value system that permit that use of pornography and related sexual things, and those who don't, number one. But number two, we still hear from many, many people who throughout the world, regardless of religion, regardless of ethnic background or family of origin or whatever, who say that engaging in pornography use too frequently to the point where it becomes an addiction and becomes overwhelming in their life is detrimental. Without fail, that is something that we hear frequently from all walks of life. And so, like I said, there are many who would say this is okay. This is the kind of behavior that something that men just simply do, and it's okay. Whether or not it's okay, I certainly couldn't say for you. Every person is going to be different. Some people find that it's something they can choose to engage in periodically, and it doesn't affect their life in a way that they don't like. But there are many who certainly indicate that it's only a matter of time before this sort of thing really becomes problematic. And the reason why it becomes problematic is because it creates dysfunctional areas of life, simply put. It starts to affect relationships. That's often one of the first places where it's noticed. And so the spouse relationship, significant other relationship, family members, children, coworkers, all those kinds of relationships are impacted by it. And often the person experiencing addiction or dysfunctional behavior because of pornography don't understand that it is impacting their relationships until it becomes a big problem. And somebody finally points it out. Eventually they do become aware, and sometimes it's far enough along that it's not an easy fix. And so recovery is needed, and so one has to engage in recovery steps to be able to do that. But ultimately, as I said before, I've said a few times tonight, we're all sexual beings. You know, we also feel that in addition to being sexual beings, we're also spiritual beings, and we're also physical beings, obviously. And so because there is more than one aspect to us as human beings and in our human experience, I find it very difficult to ever be able to isolate any one side of the human experience and say that it doesn't affect the others. I think it certainly does, and we take a very holistic perspective on that, because we see time and time again people who indicate that when life gets out of balance, because of any one thing that starts to become overwhelming or too demanding, or starts to alter their view, their perspective, their emotions, their overall well-being, which are all very important aspects of what pornography can do to people, it definitely becomes very destructive. So I think I'd be very careful with the in-depth comfort level with it. Again, I think everybody's free to choose what they want to include in their lives, and some people engage in it at a level that doesn't impact their life negatively, at least not in an obvious way. But I would argue that even if it's not consciously known, it does have an impact in many aspects of life: emotional, physical, spiritual, and that one needs to be conscious of their balance in life and their overall sense of peace and satisfaction in life to be able to know what kind of help they might need with it over time.
Okay, we're at the top of the hour. We have one last question that will kind of wrap up the evening. We are so grateful for those who are live, and we're grateful for all those who emailed in their questions beforehand so that they could listen to this later. But this final question is I believe it's the same young lady, says, my husband refuses to get help or even admit that he has a problem. How can I make him stop, and what are the risks if he doesn't stop? The first one is to realize you can't make him do anything, but I'll turn it over to Tori.
Yeah, I would agree, Tony. I think there's no way for a spouse to force change upon their spouse, and that's difficult to hear. I know for someone, it sounds like there's a great deal of frustration and despair, even from the person who's asking that question. And I hear you. I definitely understand that. There are so many people who struggle because of this, whether they're the person who's addicted or whether they're simply supporting the person who's addicted. It's a very significant thing. And there's a term in therapy that we use called homeostasis, which basically means that we as human beings tend to want to stay where we are. We tend to want to stay in the situation that we're in because change is viewed as threatening. It's scary. It's unknown. It's a difficult thing. And Tony's highlighting right now on a slide the fact that resistance comes into play and that there's often reluctance to change. It's a very natural thing, as I said, with that homeostasis. That resistance comes into play very strongly when one feels threatened. Think of it as the fight or flight mentality. That mentality is basically, I need to protect myself at all cost. And so if I need to do something to preserve my own safety, my own well-being, my own system, my own current behavior, I'm going to do that. So one often feels threatened if someone else is calling into question their behaviors or whatever they feel is sort of their comfort zone, their normal behavioral patterns. In many cases, they feel like addiction, pornography addiction especially, is a very important coping technique for them. And as a result, if you say, you've got to end that, you've got to stop that, that's going to feel very overwhelming to think, what do you mean, get rid of that? I don't want to get rid of that. That's something that I use to get through tough things in life. And so it feels very threatening. So I would suggest that you consider the state where your spouse is right now, knowing that eventually the desire for change does come, but it can be a painful road to get there. So understand, number one, that you really can't force change. And over time, you'll be able to gain some peace with that idea, knowing that ultimately change has to come from within a person. And so knowing that, I'd suggest be patient, show them love, show them support, and also seek the love and support that you need to be able to get through that. And we're happy to talk further with you about that so that we can help you along that path.
Okay, thank you so much, Tori. We really appreciate it. And we want to end here with this last slide, just because it's all about you and it's about healing you. Your past need not condemn the future. So in other words, just because you've made mistakes in the past, that doesn't mean that determines who you are in the future. You can change. And as this quote says by George B. Shaw, we are made wise not by the recollection of our past, but by the responsibility for our future. You can all do it. You're great. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you, Tori, for taking some time to answer them. Everybody have a wonderful evening.